Well, my research covers a very broad spectrum from investigating some of the big questions in biology, all the way through to the questions in social science associated with things like urbanization and cities and institutions and companies, all the way through to something that is the most important of all, and that is thinking of the planet as a whole, trying to develop a conceptual framework for thinking about the planet as an integrated, almost super-duper organism, and whether in particular the kind of socioeconomic system we have that has led to all the wonders and quality of life that we all participate in, or some of us are privileged to participate in, can be sustainable.
What led you to focus on the relationship between the cities and organisms in your studies?
Some of that was at a personal level, and some of it was because of external circumstances. And the external circumstances were because I was doing fundamental physics, and that was associated with a big accelerator, particle accelerator, that was to be built in the United States, that was no longer going to be built, and so there was a kind of crisis, and part of that crisis was encapsulated by the comment that was being made, a kind of anti-science comment, in my opinion, that people would say physics was the science of the 19th and 20th centuries, and the science of the 21st century would be biology, and there was the corollary to that there was no need to do any more fundamental physics. And so part of it was my reaction that to show that biology, for it to really get to some of the deep questions, needed a paradigm of physics. Didn't necessarily be physicists, but a way of thinking that physics supplied. And I wanted to show that that was the case. I wanted to put money where my mouth was, so I started thinking about biological questions. And the one I started with was to think about why do we age, and why am I going to die? And why is it that I will not live more than 100 years, and nor will you? One of the things that we do, of course, is we have to eat to metabolize in order to fight the forces of entropy. Entropy is an expression of the necessary disorder that results from the process of transforming energy to create order. And that's encapsulated in the second law of thermodynamics, which is the most fundamental law of all science. It supersedes everything. And just to repeat what that says, that if you create order, so like keeping me alive, that necessarily creates disorder, and that costs a huge amount of energy in order to create the forces of wear and tear and damage that is occurring just by staying alive. And it turns out the work that I had done on scaling laws in biology, which is asking how do things scale as you change size, showed that the amount of energy that is needed at the cellular level to support an individual decreases with size, so that your cells require less energy than your dog's, but your horse requires even less energy, okay, that kind of thing. So that explains why things live longer that are bigger. Bigger things live much longer than smaller things. And so that gives insight into the kinds of questions about the mechanisms through which this process of wear and tear eventually leads to the eventual destruction And the last part of this is the whole role of natural selection, because natural selection demands that you, of course, reproduce, but it also demands that you die, because you need to make room for new things to happen. And we have evolved so that in a natural state we would have 10 to 15 children, of which maybe 8 or 9 might survive. But you don't need to live beyond 40, because that's by the age 40 in the natural world, a 40-year-old woman would have already had 12 children. And so natural selection doesn't care after that. So you have to put all that together, and amazingly, you can show that 100 years is about the maximum. Actually, it's about 120. But...
When did you first fall in love with science?
I was interested in science, truly interested in science, probably in high school. It had to wait till high school. I mean, I was always very curious, and very curious about and fascinated by the fact that mathematics was so much more predictive and deep than anything I read in the Bible. And that influenced me enormously, because the Bible just tells these stories and it doesn't explain anything. And the idea that there's this God that explains everything was not satisfactory. That may be true, but it's not satisfactory. And whereas physics and mathematics explains very deep questions, so much so that now we understand everything from the origin of the universe, the Big Bang, all the way through to the formation of galaxies and planets and so on, extraordinarily well. So it was much later in life that I fell in love with science, as a thing, being interested in science.
What is the most unexpected discovery you've made in your research?
Understanding, so the work that I did in biology led to a deep understanding of the mechanisms by which energy, that is metabolic energy, keeps us alive, and that all worked, and those scaling laws, these extraordinary scaling laws that relate, an elephant to a human being to a mouse, so that we see that a whale, an elephant, a giraffe, a human being and a mouse, although they look different, they've evolved differently, are actually, roughly speaking, scaled versions of one another. We're all basically the same thing. That also led to thinking about plants, trees, and understanding how plants, trees work, and how forests work. And I would say the most spiritual and wonderful thing that has excited me about the work that I have done is to walk through a forest. Just out here, you can walk through a forest out here, and you walk through, and it looks like just a bunch of trees. Some are big, some are small, different things. And, it just looks like it's arbitrary and capricious. And to know that under that lies extraordinary regularity. That forest is incredibly regular, and each tree is incredibly regular. The tree doesn't know it, the forest doesn't know it, but I know it.
What are some simple changes cities can make to become more sustainable?
Well, first, the obvious ones, we need to be much more cognizant of the way we use energy and resources, and, that's sort of a no-brainer. The other thing, the most fundamental thing we need to change, which is also a no-brainer, is to return to the way the whole Earth evolved until the beginning of the 19th century. That is, it used energy from the sun. And we were an open system. And we then started using stored energy, and so burning the surface of the Earth. That's what we do, that's what you're doing now. It's keeping these lights on, is burning the surface of the Earth. And we're a closed system. And if you're a closed system, you produce entropy, and that is not sustainable. But if you have an open system, the second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply to just an open system. It has to be a closed system. And the closed system, when you're not burning the surface, includes the sun. So, you know, it's in order to keep sustained, we need to turn everything over to solar-powered energy.
How do scaling laws apply to cities, and why should we know more about this?
That goes to something much deeper than that. You know, it's like, you know, what do you want to do with your life, and what do you care about, and so on. And, you know, if you just care about living, then why would you care about scaling laws? But if you care about why am I living, and what's the whole point of living, then you might care about them. Because as far as I can tell, the only point about living is to love and to understand. Because we are the only force in the universe, as far as I can tell, that cares about anything and that wants to understand, and it's our way for the universe to know itself. So in that sense, understanding fundamental laws like scaling, everybody should be interested in if they want to have a meaningful life.
How can the youth get involved in the kind of research that you do?
Well, you have to be, of course, you have to have a certain predilection towards it. You have to, you know, be interested in it and have to care about those questions. And of course, you know, unfortunately, it also requires a certain talent in terms of being able to think conceptually about things and so forth, and a lot of that can be taught. So I think, you know, what I've just heard a little bit this afternoon is the kind of situation that can inspire young people to get excited about science and so forth. You know, in terms of my own education, I was exposed to such things at various stages, and that did inspire me, but I wasn't very good at it. And it took a long time before I realized that there were certain things I could be good at and I could do in order to really try to understand the world around me. But I would say, no, I mean, it's being exposed to and being inspired by situations like this, which should be an integral part of everybody's educational process.